and welcome back to my channel. I am Linda and I am an intuitive healer and an awareness coach. And in this channel, I bring you clear and practical guidance to help you heal from your past pain, reconnect to your soul, and live your best life. So the topic of today is about how we fail to recognize trauma in our society. And this topic came about because I was watching YouTube. I watch a lot of YouTube videos because I love to learn new things and to hear different perspectives. And I was watching this lady that I follow, which is a young lady of color who actually does a lot of reviews and reactions on her channel to TV, movies, and music. And she was actually doing a review of the movie Malcolm and Marie, which is a movie that came out recently. In the interest of full disclosure, I haven't watched movies. I don't really generally watch movies very much anymore. I also don't watch TV. I haven't owned a TV in years. But I was watching this because I really love her perspective on a lot of different subjects. And I love it when people bring social commentary into art, specifically movie and TV, etc. So I was watching her review and she was talking about this movie, Malcolm and Marie, which is a movie that came out, I believe it was like either on HBO or Netflix or one of those streaming services. And the stars of the movie are Zendaya and John David Washington, I think his name is the son of Denzel Washington. And the movie is about this couple, the relationship between this couple, which are is a Hollywood couple, right? And I saw her review and I found it very interesting and very insightful because it talks about the abuse that is reflected or the abuse that is portrayed in that movie. And I actually, as a result of that, because YouTube sort of recommends other videos, I got to see a few other different reviews and reactions to the movie. And one of the biggest topics or points of conversation about that particular movie was the abuse and the toxicity of the smell role, the smell character in that movie. And that actually got me thinking. I didn't see the movie, but I did see a little bits and pieces that people use, little clips when people use when they were reviewing the movie or reacting to the movie. And that actually got me thinking about our inability to see or recognize trauma in our society. And the reason why I say that is because for me, when I saw that, and this is probably a byproduct of all of the personal work that I've done, all of the self-development work that I've done over the last, 10 plus years, 12 years, however long it's been now, is that when I see these things, I immediately recognize that there's trauma there, right? Because someone is not violent, someone is not abusive, someone is not a toxic person, and I hate that term, by the way, that's why I use quotations, but that's a different topic for a different day. But someone doesn't behave in that way unless they themselves have deep trauma and possibly and oftentimes severe abuse in their own childhood. So as a result of watching that, these thoughts came into my head, and I think YouTube, by virtue of me watching a bunch of these videos, YouTube started recommending other things, and one of the things it recommended is a review or a reaction to the movie Forrest Gump. Now, I did see Forrest Gump when it came out. I think it's been 20 years. I don't remember when it came out, but it's definitely been on or about 20 years since that movie came out. And I was watching this reaction from someone else, and what I found really interesting is something that actually reinforces this thing that I was thinking about Malcolm and Marie, and it is this idea that we don't recognize trauma. Because in Forrest Gump, and spoiler alert, right, there will be spoilers because I will be talking about that particular movie because I did see it. I remember when I watched that movie how much I disliked Jenny, the female character, right? And by the way, if you haven't seen the movie, you should watch it. I think it's a really good movie. But how much I disliked her. And when I was watching that reaction, then I ended up watching a couple other reactions and reviews, everybody just seems to really either strongly dislike her or hate her because she was sort of or appears to be dismissive of Forrest and kind of always sort of like push him to the side and just kind of came in and out of his life while he obviously really loved her all his life, etc. And I was actually one of those people that strongly disliked her when I saw the movie. Now, cut back to 20 whatever years later, I'm watching that movie, and maybe it's because I'm watching it through different eyes that I recognize how severely traumatized she was, and how her pushing him away from her it could have been, in my opinion, is a way for her trying to protect him from her and from her trauma. Because it is implied in that movie, and I don't know that it is actually as much implied as much as it's not explicitly stated, but it's made very clear that she comes from severe abuse. In fact, depending on how you interpret some of the scenes, I tend to believe that she was suffered severe sexual abuse, incestuous sexual abuse, but also potentially physical and definitely emotional and psychological abuse as well, and also was a witness to her siblings experiencing some of that as well. So any of those instances individually, is the cause or can be the cause for severe trauma. Any combination of those, increases the trauma response exponentially. So just watching that again and realizing how traumatized she was, and how throughout most of her life she was what we call a lost soul, which another term I don't like, right? But someone who was always getting herself into these types of really degrading situations that were painful to her, situations that continue to reinforce her childhood trauma. And my take of her not wanting to be with Forrest was because it's not because she thought she was better than him or smarter than him, but it is because she felt that he was better than her, that he was too good for her, that she felt she didn't deserve more, and that probably she didn't believe that life could give her more. That is definitely my interpretation, but my interpretation aside, right, even if you disagree with my interpretation, just take it as face value. She was a severely traumatized person, a severely traumatized woman. So and most of us, as we watch that movie, we are not able to recognize, because we live in a society where we are so polarized, especially in the US. We're constantly looking for the good guy, right? The person that we should feel sorry for, we should feel compassion for, or that shares our perspective, or that is closer in action or thought to our perspective, so that we get the appointed good guy, and then the other person that is in disagreement with that, right, or that is not in alignment with this person, is by definition the bad guy. And that is the person that we dismiss, or that's the person that we discard, or that's the person that we reject, or in a lot of cases that's the person that we attack, right? And I feel that that is what we have in this movie Forrest Gump, and even to some degree this movie Malcolm and Marie, right? Because Forrest Gump is a little bit more polarizing, because you have the pure innocent good guy with I believe he had some sort of mental disability, and you have the girl who's always doing the wrong thing and always hurting him, right? Never mind that she's severely traumatized, that doesn't matter, right? She's just not being nice to the good guy. And is a little bit different in Malcolm and Marie, right? Because even though she is also severely traumatized and wounded, she is not what we would consider a pure innocent soul, right? Like we see Forrest Gump. So that's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more complicated, but even in that scenario, we still have the good guy and the bad guy. Now, the thing about it is, right, that what we need to understand is that we can have, just because you're able to see and recognize someone's trauma, say you have someone who is abusive, right, or a toxic person, just because we're able to recognize their trauma and feel compassion for them does not mean that we condone their behavior, does not mean that we approve of their behavior, or that we are signing off on their behavior. In fact, I have another video on my YouTube channel that is called, I think it's validation versus approval, or approval versus validation, or something like that, where I talk about how important it is that we learn to separate how validating someone's experience versus approving of someone's experience. And this is actually almost the same thing, right? Is being able to recognize and validate and understand the fact that someone is severely traumatized and have compassion for them, and knowing that that doesn't mean that they're not to be held accountable for their actions, right? Knowing that that doesn't mean that you're condoning or approving of their behaviors. And I think the reason why it's so important is because if we really want to create this world that we say we want to create, right, where people are respectful to each other, where people are kind to each other, where people are loving towards each other, we need to start with ourselves, right? Like Michael Jackson said, man in the mirror. And that's another great example of polarization as well, that I'm not going to get into because we don't have enough time. But it's important that we recognize that it is having compassion for someone else and recognizing their pain and their trauma doesn't mean that we agree with their thoughts, that we agree with their words, that we agree with their behaviors. What it does allow us to do is find a point of connection, a point where me as a human can connect with that person as a human and that pain. And I believe that through doing that is that we can, in fact, then potentially influence that person, right? We cannot force people into change. We cannot coerce people into behaving differently or thinking differently that they do. What we can do is show them some compassion, show that we can see the whole picture, that we are not only seeing the bad part of them or the negative part of them, but that we are seeing other parts of them as well, that we recognize their humanity, and in doing so show some compassion. And I think that really is truly the only way that we can get to the root of the wounds that we have collectively as a society, but also to start the healing process through that compassion, through that level of connection of human to human, is that we can really start healing all of this deep rooted wounds and pains and trauma that give rise to a lot of the violence and hatred and polarization and division that we see. So I do feel that it is incumbent upon us to really take that step, to start becoming more open to seeing all aspects of people, so that we can then have some compassion, and hopefully through showing that person that we see them and showing them a little bit of compassion, really change the world and create the world that we all say we want to live in and that we want to leave behind for newer generations. Now, that doesn't mean, like, we're all human, right? That does not mean that you don't get angry. That doesn't mean that you still are going to want that person to feel guilty, and you still are going to want that person to feel ashamed, and you're still gonna, and it's okay to have those emotions. Emotions are always okay. They just are, and they provide us with information. But how we behave towards those people, how we react or respond towards them, is what is within our control, is what we can fine tune, so that we move in this world in a way that is in alignment with the world that we want to see, that is, so that our insides match our outside, right? Or more accurately, our outside matches our insides, right? And that's really the only way that I can think that we can change things and create this world that we want to live in. So I hope that this is helpful to you. And as always, until next time, namaste.